International Standard 10 Basic Human Rights Standards for Law Enforcement Officials.
Good evening, Miss A. I'm Jillian Ortega, and I will report the topic of International Standard 10 Basic Human Rights Standard for Law Enforcement Officials.
Introduction. These 10 basic human rights standards for law enforcement officials were prepared by Amnesty International in association with police officials and experts from different countries. They are based on United Nations law enforcement, criminal justice, and human rights standards. They are intended as a quick reference and not a full explanation of or commentary on the applicability of international human rights standards relevant to law enforcement. Basic Standard 1. Everyone is entitled to equal protection of the law without discrimination on any grounds, and especially against violence or threat. Be especially vigilant to protect potentially vulnerable groups such as children, the elderly, women, refugees, displaced persons, and members of minority. Everyone is entitled without any discrimination to equal protection of the law. Everyone has the right to liberty and security of the person.
And according to Basic Standard number 1, it is the great importance that police officers at all times and to fulfill the duty imposed them by law because in Basic Standard number 1 is treat equal protection by law without discrimination, and everyone has the right to uh, to fair trial, and everyone has the right to freedom, and everyone has the right to movement. So in Basic Standard number 1 is we need to treat equal protection by law without discrimination.
Basic Standard 2. Treat all victims of crime with compassion and respect, and in particular protection their safety and privacy. Ensure that, if needed, measures are taken to ensure the protection and safety of victims from intimidation and retaliation. Give particular attention to victims who have special needs because of the nature of the harm inflicted on them or because of factors such as race, color, gender, sexual orientation, age, language, religion, nationality, political or other opinion, disability, ethnic or social origin.
And according to Basic Standard number 2, to all victims, law enforcers ensure that all victims is give a particular attention with compassion and respect. And the law enforce enforcer should know the safetyness and privacy of a victim, because sometimes in other law enforcer and and other officials, if we have a case, then we they are not to have concern about the victim. So in the Basic Standard too, that we need to protect the victims, uh, their uh, their privacy and security, and of course we need to respect with compassion.
Basic Standard 3. Do not use force except when strictly necessary and to the minimum extent required under the circumstances. Ensure that all possible assistance and medical aid are rendered to any injured or affected persons at the earliest possible moment. Ensure that relatives or close friends of the injured or affected persons are not notified at the earliest possible moment.
So according to Basic Standard number 3, the law enforcer is prohibited to use his force to prey or to take the victim unless the victim is not controlling her or his self. and the police officer must be minimize the damage and injury and respect and preserve human life.
Basic Standard 4. Avoid using force when policing unlawful but not violent assemblies. When dispersing violent assemblies, use force only to the minimum extent necessary. In the policing of assemblies that are unlawful but not violent, police officers must avoid the use of force. If force is indispensable, for example, to secure the safety of others, they must restrict such force to the minimum extent necessary and in compliance with the other provisions in Basic Standard 3. Firearms shall not be used in the policing of non-violent assemblies. The use of firearms is strictly limited to the objectives mentioned in Basic Standard 5.
And according to basic standard number 4, it is the like of basic standard number 3. Do not use their force to take the victim. And basic standard number 4 is that are unlawful but not violent. And the law enforcer is again not very prohibited to use his force to take the victim.
Basic Standard 5. Lethal force should not be used except when strictly unavoidable in order to protect your life or the lives of others. In self-defense or in defense of others against the imminent threat or death or serious injury. To prevent the perpetration of a particularly serious crime involving grave threat to life.
According to basic standard number 5 is uh, we have the law that we need to follow, and if ever the victim he said uh, he defend herself, use her self-defense, it is not it is not good because we have the law that killing other people it is the violent by law. So it's either he said that he used her he used her self-defense to defend herself. We need he or she punished because we have a law that we need to follow.
Basic Standard 6. Arrest no person unless there are legal grounds to do so, and the arrest is carried out in accordance with lawful arrest procedures. Arrest or detention shall only be carried out strictly in accordance with the provisions of the law and by competent officials or persons authorized for that purpose. Police or other authorities which arrest a person shall exercise only the powers granted to them under the law.
Basic standard number 6 is in this standard is 6, do not arrest in any person unless they are legal to do, and uh, the law enforcer or other authorities which arrest a person shall be exercise only uh, the the granted to them and under the law. And anyone arrested must be in found at all times of arrest because of the reasons of arrest.
Basic Standard 7. Ensure all detainees have access promptly after arrest to their family and legal representative and to any necessary medical assistance. Detainees should be promptly told of their rights, including the right to commit compliance about their treatment. A detainee who is a foreigner should be promptly informed of his or her right to communicate with the relevant consular post or diplomatic mission.
In basic standard number 7 is, for example, the detainee is foreigner and should be promptly informed the foreigner and try to communicate and with the relevant consular posts or diplomatic missions, and we need to tell her Miranda rights in English or in the way he understand his violation by law.
Basic Standard 8, all detainees must be treated humanly. Do not inflict, instigate, or tolerate any act of torture or ill treatment in any circumstances and refuse to obey any order to do so. Law enforcement officials should be instructed that rape of women in their custody constitutes an act of torture that will not be tolerated. Similarly, they should be instructed that any other forms of sexual abuse may constitute torture or cruel, inhuman, or degrading treatment, and those offenders will be brought to justice.
Law enforcers should be instructed that uh, any other forms of sexual abuse may act or torture or to cruel, because according to UDHR section article 5, uh, no one shall be subjected to torture or to cruel, inhuman, or degrading treatment or punishment.
Basic Standard 9. Do not carry out, order or cover up extrajudicial executions or disappearances and refuse to obey any order to do so. A justifiable killing in self-defense. A killing is an armed conflict situation which is not prohibited by international humanitarian law to implement. Basic Standard 9, it is important that the use of force and firearms by the police strictly complies with all the provisions in Basic Standard 3, 4, and 5.
And according to basic standard number 9, it is important that the use of force and firearms by the police strictly complies with all provisions, and self-defense is justifiable according to basic standard number 9.
Basic Standard 10. Report all breaches of these basic standards to your senior officers and to the Office of the Public Prosecutor. Do everything within your power to ensure steps are taken to investigate these breaches.
According to the last basic standards number 10, um, if the police officials has committed a crime or breach of regulations, was he or she acting under orders or with the acquiescence of other officials. So if a officials committed a crime, report it all breaches of the basic standard to your senior officer and to the office, the public prosecutor, and should be investigate fully, promptly, and independent to what happened the police officials that committing a crime.